Good evening. Is this on? Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. Good evening and welcome, everyone. I have these notes that I prepared with so much thought, as some of you know, out of respect for this evening's speaker, Ashwini Bhat. I'm not going to read much of it after having spent time with her. I'm going to try to just speak from the heart. But before I do that, I do need to read the first part of my introduction with some really important details that I don't want to forget. First of all, I'm Annie Carlano, not that I'm going to forget that, Senior Curator of Craft, Design, and Fashion here at the Mint Museum. And I do want to say I'm delighted to introduce this evening's program for two reasons. The first, I have to say selfishly, is because I've been interested in her work for the Mint Museum since 2018, first seeing it at Lucy Lacoste Gallery in Concord, Massachusetts. But also because this event marks the first time we're collaborating with artists, residencies, and programs with StarWorks in Star, North Carolina. You will remember that we collaborated with StarWorks on the reinstallation of the Craft and Design Galleries just a few years ago. But this is the first time we worked together on a grant application to the National Endowment for the Arts to work collaboratively to bring important artists who are really contributing to the definition of contemporary ceramics today, globally, in both residencies and then public programs or private programs as we are doing tonight. And I also want to give a shout out to Firefest at StarWorks. Firefest takes place this weekend, or this Friday and Saturday. But it is Saturday, April 1st, for those of you who don't already have this on your calendar, where Ashwini Bhat's incredible larger-than-life ceramic sculpture will be fired and unveiled. And that takes place between 6 and 8 p.m. in the evening, so if you have a busy Saturday afternoon, you can still attend at that time for the unveiling. And now this is the part where I've got all this really serious art historical stuff that just doesn't really convey how I feel about Ashwini and her work, but you do need to know that she grew up in southern India, in Kerala, and first studied dance, classical dance, a very ancient form of classical dance, for many years, and actually was part of a traveling dance troupe. And then she had an injury and found her way to clay. And her teacher in Pondicherry was actually an American who had studied. It all goes back to Japan, right? With a Bizen kind of trained ceramicist student of Susan Peterson, which is all very interesting. She also has a degree in literature. And so she's coming to clay with this kind of multi or transdisciplinary perspective. And I will only say that her approach to clay is very much influenced by her environment, which is now Northern California, just north of San Francisco. And her recent work is very tumultuous. It looks as if it's from the earth, of the earth. She, although she's trained and her studies were with wheel-thrown ceramics, she does mostly hand building, slab and coiled, mostly slab. And it has an energy from the earth. There's a performative aspect to what she does. There's a poetic and a deeply profound narrative that is connected to the body, the earth, and the spirit. And I don't want to say very much more because this all seems a little precious. I will just say that she is the recipient of many prestigious honors, including an award from the McKnight Foundation. Her work is in many museums and private collections internationally. and I am sure you will see her again at the Mint Museum. And now I turn it over to you, Ashwini. Thank you.
Set up a few things here. Yes. We choreographed it that way. Yes. Thank you, Annie, for that beautiful introduction. Thank you, everyone who has come here today. I keep thinking today is Saturday, but it isn't. I've totally lost sense of time. I arrived in Star on the 21st, which was on Tuesday, and I started building this 7-foot tall sculpture on Wednesday, like 7 a.m., and I ended glazing it last night around 6 p.m. So anything in between, it's all a blur. I even carried some clay on my shoe. I realized it when I was walking the museum rooms with Annie. It was too late to do anything about it. So what I thought I'll do today is to kind of give 30 to 35 minutes overlay of the kind of work I do, and then I would like to open up the floor for question or conversation, which is always more fun for me to do than hear my own voice for too long. This image here, I chose this image because this piece on the left is a headdress or a fertility goddess, earth goddess image from Harappan Indus Valley civilization, which is the birthplace of Indian civilization. And I've had that image pinned up on my study room since I was dancing, like it was even way before, almost 10 years before I came into clay. So I've carried that image with me, and I'm still not bored with the idea of these fertility goddesses. And on the right, we're adjusting the lights, yeah. So on the right is a sculpture, it's the first sculpture I made in 2008. So as Annie mentioned, I'm okay to be in the dark as long as my work has the light. Yeah, and you can hear me well? I think this is good. So the plan is once the presentation is over, we'll put the shades up and everybody can see everyone's beautiful faces. So on the right is a sculpture I made in 2008, the very first sculpture I made, and I've kind of come back to the imagery of the headdress, the half moon crescent or an axe-shaped headdress quite often, including in the last few years. One thing which made me work on this sculpture in 2008 is I was interested in sculpture but was not working in a figurative way. But for me, just starting to work with this sculpture, I started to look at the form as a complete body to the extent that, so this is about 16 inches tall, just to give you a reference. And in the next 2 years, I scaled it up to almost 5 feet tall. I'm 5'4", so it's almost my size. And it was interesting, the shift I felt in also the relationship I felt with the sculpture. And I was talking to Hannah? Holly, sorry, I'm so sorry. Just a few minutes ago, we were talking about the power of life size sculptures where not just the maker's body, but also the viewer's body is kind of in direct relationship with what they are seeing. So this is the scale I actually love to build. So I keep coming back to this scale quite often. And this is in a studio in Pondicherry, my teacher's studio. And this went to a sculpture garden project. Um, so between 2012 and 2017, I kind of lived a nomadic life, traveling from one residency to another or one community center to another, living out of two suitcases, and lived also like in 13 or 14 different states in the US, not more than 4 months at a stretch. And I got to kind of refine my own work, but also at the same time meet people, collaborate with artists. So here is a collaboration I did with Forrest Gander, who is a poet, eco-poet, writer, who now happens to be my life partner. But we came together as collaborators in the beginning. And this is an installation, it is named Interior Landscape, thinking about art and literature revival which happened in the southern India about 300 BC. And the movement is called Sangam, which is can be loosely translated as coming together, where the idea of talking about the landscape did not exist as if considering the landscape which is outside of your body. So everything, if you're talking about landscape, had to do with your internal self. And that's where kind of my work also started changing and became much more connected to the ecology and environment. And I went to Japan for the first time. This is in Shigaraki, which is like the mecca for ceramic people. And again, you can see the headdress kind of coming back into focus, but the shape changing ever so slightly. Here I'm also seeing right behind my waist, there is a slit, you can see through it. And that idea came from watching these stone lanterns, which can be found everywhere outside a temple in Japan, where they would light a lamp in the evenings. So certain things of the particular environment where I was making the work kind of came into this body of work. That was the last residency I did. So end of 2017 kind of saw also the end of my nomadic life. And I moved to California to a place called Petaluma. If you're had a Lagunita beer, that's where it's manufactured. Petaluma is about 40 miles north of San Francisco, absolutely beautiful. Point Reyes is just 20 minutes from Petaluma, just to give an idea. And I moved to Petaluma to do a residency, and my partner decided to move to Petaluma. He was teaching in the East Coast, and everything I had in this country belonged in about 6 to 7 cardboard boxes. And I hadn't even opened the boxes. There was the 2017 Tubbs fire, which burned down half of Santa Rosa, which was only 19 miles away from Petaluma. So everyone who lived in Petaluma was on high alert to evacuate if there was a need. So my introduction to Petaluma was this, but it was also an unusual introduction to a place because I saw the way the community came together to help people who were evacuating from Santa Rosa and other areas. Everybody opened up their backyard and front yards, and people were camping in other people's houses. It was incredible to watch this phenomena. And for someone like me who was a recent immigrant, I moved here with an artist visa only in 2015, just 2 years before that. When I first came for a residency here, I knew 2 people in the whole country. So someone like me who is trying to build a community here, it was extremely emotional, and I kind of feel that I fell in love with the faulty landscape, a landscape which was changing ever so dramatically, also because of climate change. Until this point, I was a wood fire ceramicist. I used these long firings in Anagama kilns, 5 days, 7 days, where you're listening to the fire to know what's happening inside shut doors of the kiln. Fire was thought as a regenerative fuel. I also come from a community from South India. The name of the community is Havyaks, which can be loosely translated as those who worship the fire. So traditionally, my grandparents were either priests or agriculturists. So it's kind of interesting that only in 2017, I saw fire as a destructive element. So I kind of wanted to understand. Everybody would tell me, oh, this never used to be the case in California. This is changing, things are changing rapidly. So I kind of wanted to understand this phenomena of forest fire better. So I'm going to show a video which is about 2 minutes, 45 seconds, has no audio, just to give an understanding of the video was made for a project I did at AMOCA, which is American Museum of Ceramic Arts in Pomona, California. And you will see me working out in the wilderness because by 2017, 2018, I started teaming up with biologists, filmmakers, other poets, eco-poets, who were interested in studying post-fire forests. So these biologists, what they were doing was to go into completely burnt forests and stay there for weeks on end to study what kind of organisms come back to the burnt forests. I especially have a memory of waiting in a gray-colored tent, not to disturb the animals, for about 4 hours, along with 2 biologists who were specifically studying black-backed woodpecker. And apparently they are the first species to come back to a burnt forest, and they need the burnt forest to procreate. So they were there to collect the black-backed woodpecker's poop to see what they were eating, what kind of vegetation are they depending upon. So things changed really dramatically for my own studio practice. Once I would come back from these long, week-long trips, I had no way of going back to my old ways of working. So I'll play the video and continue talking about it. So I started thinking about my own studio practice as much more than within the 4 walls of a studio. I started thinking about my material as much more than just clay, although that's the material I fell in love with once I left the dance world. Things started emerging in a certain way that I felt that I could bring back my dance experience and what was happening right now in my surrounding, in this land, in this place which I have now come to call home. And through this, I was also making a community which was more than just artists, because until then I was only hopping from one artistic community to another. But here I was meeting, talking, collaborating with scientists, biologists, filmmakers, poets, or when I'm up on the trail on a hike, it was random people who would just walk by and watch me work, ask me questions, and it all started to become as part of the actual studio practice for me. Another thing is, so what you're seeing right now here is completely charred trees. So when you go into a burnt forest, if you're looking at a human eye level, it is all black, all charred, and it is very easy to feel depressed about it, very down about it. Look at only the loss. But interestingly, once you start walking and start to focus on the ground, there you see new life emerging, new leaf, new seedlings, mushrooms of various kinds and colors. So I started thinking about fire as not just causing destruction, not just causing loss, but also contributing to the regeneration of the land. So these are two archival prints I did where my own body is kind of imprinted with the charred wood. And I did work on a long series of these archival prints. But even so, I kind of took a year off of working in sculpture in 2018. It was also the first year where I was no longer living by taking my clothes out of a suitcase, and that felt good but also weird. I didn't have a studio. I was working in a part of a garage, which where my partner and I lived. So I spent a whole of 2018 out doing research work or in the hikes and meeting people. And I would come back to my garage studio and I would do clay tests because I was new to using these California clays. And I do love that nerdy quality in ceramics where you have to calculate the shrinkage and figure out the glaze, the chemistry part of it. So I kind of dedicated a year and a half just for that. And I knew deep down that when I would come back to sculpture, it would be nothing like what I had done until now. So this is the beginning of that new body of work. This project began in 2018, and the project is titled Assembling California. The title I borrowed from a book by the same name by John McPhee, who is a brilliant writer. If you are into geology, I would highly recommend that book. He is traveling from one end of the state to the another, talking about the complex geological history of the state. So each sculpture here is named after either a trail or a fire or a post-fire forest. On the left, the piece is titled as Earthquake Trail, which is only 20 miles from where I live, near Point Reyes, where the San Andreas Fault passes through. and this one is also in the Point Reyes area named Sky Trail. And this is where I started bringing found elements from my hike. On the left, you can see lace lichen, which is also the California state lichen, and the blue, pink thread you see. It is kind of a symbolic gesture I'm bringing from a southern Indian ritual practice, where if you go to a temple, invariably walking out of the temple, you will see a tree, and the tree will be covered with thread or fabric, cloth fabric, where people are kind of leaving their wishes behind, almost like a, the coin wish pond works. But I'm kind of interested in this phenomena where the tree itself becomes as important as the temple. So here I'm thinking about these bodies as either human bodies or limbs or tree limbs coming together, and I'm kind of choreographing them in a certain way based on the experiences I have had in a hike. On the right, you can see parts of quartz. They are actual quartz rocks. They belong to an art collector in Napa whose daughter happens to be a poet by the name Jane Mead. And they lost their entire ranch in the 2017 Atlas fire. And when he passed away, he left his collection to his daughter. One thing I forgot to say is when the ranch burned down, his entire art collection was also burned down. The only thing to survive was these 7 to 10 boxes of rocks. So the rocks you see here in the sculpture have gone through a natural forest fire. And Jane Mead passed away in 2019, and she gifted the rock collection to my partner because he comes from a geology background before he comes into poetry. And he gifted them to me, and they have been sitting in my studio and coming as part of my own work. Good on time. This is another collaborative project I did with the Forest Gander very recently in 2022, where we spent 14 months doing various hikes around Mount Tamalpais, which is situated in Marin County. And Mount Tam, as famously known as Mount Tam, many artists have taken inspiration from this mountain, including the beat poets from the 60s and 70s. And when some of these beat poets, like Gary Snyder, went to Nepal and India, when they came back, they brought back a Buddhist and a Hindu practice, which is called circumambulation, which simply means walking clockwise around a sacred object. Now, I'm born in a Hindu family, but I'm a non-practicing Hindu. And for me, the idea of beat poets finding, so what they did was once they came back to California, they found a 19-mile hike which forms a perfect circle around the mountain. So they would circumambulate around the mountain, where the mountain itself becomes the shrine. So for a non-religious person like me, replacing an idea of a shrine or a god or a goddess with the mountain seemed very interesting. So Forrest and I did the same circumambulation many times over the span of 14 months, and we created this installation for UC Davis and worked with their students. and the theme was looking at collaboration as a method for problem solving. And here, in order to experience the entire exhibition, people, without realizing, were walking in a clockwise movement in the exhibition space. Or if you had to look at a single sculpture, they were doing a mini circumambulation around each sculpture. Since 2019, I have often worked with symbolism of a calla lily as a symbolic of regeneration. So this is also around the same time, my early months in Petaluma. I was house sitting for Forrest, and I was also taking care of his garden. And one morning I saw that a bunch of, a whole corner of the garden looked completely dead. So I sent an email to Forrest, who was in Japan then doing a translation project, saying, "I'm so sorry, I think I killed part of your garden." And I sent a photo, and he said, "Oh no, they are just calla lilies. They come back in spring." And where I come from, South India, there is no dramatic change of seasons. It's like 10 months of 100 degrees summer and 2 months of non-stop rain. So I had to wait until April to see these calla lily bushes spring back. And ever since then, of course, I've also been interested in connecting the work I'm making to the body, and who can, forget Georgia O'Keeffe's rendering of the calla lily as well. So the thread element has been very much part of my sculptural practice, as well as the video and performance work I'm doing. Next few slides are from the most recent project, which I just finished and got to share with the world in January. This was a show which was a collaborative show, my solo, but also in collaboration with Forrest, who is writing specific poems for this project at Shoshana Wayne Gallery in Los Angeles. It just ended end of February. And this is my rendition of the San Andreas Fault. I've been thinking about, so every year the Assembling California project, although began as one segment thinking about the post-fire forest, every year it's changing its avatar. And last year, I think, probably because we were all coming out of a ruptured situation, I couldn't stop thinking about the fault. It's also fascinating that we are, the California state is right on that fault, and everybody talks about this big one. So what we did again, in the span of 12 months, we traveled to many parts of the 800-mile San Andreas Fault, starting from Bakersfield to Point Reyes. And this particular body of work was done after our visit to Wallace Creek, which is in Bakersfield. The creek itself is not that dramatic, but you can see the creek kind of change its whole shape. That's where the earth got separated almost like 13 feet apart. And while you are standing at the edge of that Wallace Creek, you are standing on two plates simultaneously and going in opposite direction, North American and the Pacific plate. This installation kind of runs for like 14 feet high to 18 feet wide, just to give you a perspective of the scale, and 24 segment. Each segment is formed with extremely soft slabs formed directly on top of my body. Some have a more prominent female bust in them, maybe the top one, and the long formations are all formed on top of my leg or arm. That way, my making is like constantly not just produced in interaction, but it's also kind of conceived. Even the thought process is happening along with the body. Some detail shots, and this is an installation view of some of the sculptures in the show. This one is about 36 inches by 48 inches. This one is titled as Yoni, Source of All Life. And the inverted triangle is also the symbol of Shakti, of power. These are titled as Yakshis. Yakshis are nature spirits, feminine nature spirits who live in the rocks and trees and clouds. And I'm kind of, this is the first time I was talking to Annie about it while we had a chance to walk around in the museum. And one of the conversation I was mentioning that although I moved here in 2015, it's only until this year I started actually referencing anything from South India directly, because I didn't want my work to be seen just through an exotic lens. Also, the burden of Orientalism, we still have that. So I've been thinking about this for the last 4 or 5 years, how to talk about these references. I did spend 35 years of my life in South India. I grew up in an extremely rural background. For the large part of my life, there was no TV or access to things. I was a bookworm. That's where I got most of my references and knowledge. I was also an avid reader of poetry and epic poems. So how do I talk about these things without making it sound exotic? So finally, I feel like now that I have lived away from India for these many years, I have figured a way to make references to them without feeling like I'm just dropping names. But I'm also connecting them. What I'm interested in is I'm interested in these phenomenons from South India where, especially around harvest festivals, so these are all like non-religious harvest festivals where the entire community comes together, and some folk rituals or even folk ritual performance traditions. But how do I keep connecting them to my present life, my California region? And the prints which are marked on glaze there are all trail markers. They suggest you where to go. One is a beginning of the trail, one says take a right, and one says that's the end of the trail. And the rocks are from our property in Pen Grove. This one is titled as Bhumi, Earth. And I'll go through these real quick, and we can come back to them if you have any specific questions. This one is titled as Nagini, which is snake goddess. This is me as 8 or 9 year old, And this is the only photo I have from my early dance days because we didn't have a camera, and I don't even know who took this and how I have this image. Well, my mom had saved it and I took a photo of the photo. And you might see, I think I have another image here. So this is a close-up of the Nagini, where I'm bringing in not just the thread, but also the brass bells. And these bells were used around the ankle for my traditional dance. And the traditional dance I learned is named Bharatanatyam, which is of a southern Indian classical style, because there are other classical styles in India as well. So now they have been actively coming into the sculptural work as well. And I'm constantly referencing temple architecture and Indian iconography. On the right, on the left is a sculpture who is standing in a kind of a 3-point. And those who have seen wood firing, you can also see, or it is widely known that 3-point is more stable than 4. So I'm kind of, right now, I'm in the mind space where I'm researching this 3-point posture, and I'm kind of interested in how the body shifts and how the weight shifts, something which, sculptors are always thinking about as well. But I'm kind of bringing in these decorative rings, ornamental, but without being over the top ornamental. So, and this was also part of the show at Shoshana Wayne. As you saw, the San Andreas Fault, as it was made on top of my body, I started thinking about these breastplates, which are still in use, either made out of wood or bronze, but the date goes back to like 6th century, 4th century, where ritual performers, and mostly men, wear the breastplate, and for the duration of the performance, they kind of invoke that goddess and become a female goddess themselves, and they are kind of revered as the form of goddesses during the time of performance. And this was a collaborative lenticular print. The poem is written by Forrest almost as an offering or a mantra, which reads, "I borrowed my brightness from her. Where is it now? The core hollows, but the tree lives on." So I'm now in the process of working on a performance piece, kind of continuing this thought process. Lastly, how are we feeling? I have a video for 3 minutes. Up for it? Thumbs up? Okay. So I'm going to end with, it's about 3 minutes. And for the first 40 seconds, there's no voice, and then the voice comes back. And after that, we'll get the shades up, and happy to continue this conversation.